Good morning, Pinewood families. Today is Friday, March 27th, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a heads up as to what work is to be completed today. The first piece is your writing narrative essay, and that should be final copy today is where you should be at in your writing process. If you are not there yet, if you are still revising and editing, please continue to do that and then write your final copy over the weekend. The writing piece and the calendar schedule for the writing pieces, it's a little bit more fluid, which basically means it can change. And as long as you finish one piece per week, last week persuasive essay, this week narrative essay, and next week will be your literary essay as you finish Hatchet, getting up here soon. We'll be talking about that next week as well. So finish up your narrative essay following the 5-finger retell, making sure that your story has characters developed, setting developed, a problem introduced that the characters are dealing with, the events that the characters go through in order to solve that problem, working towards a resolution. So make sure that your paper is revised and edited. Attached in the Remind thread are the reviser's checklist and editor's checklist. So if you need to be looking those up, go for it and write that final copy. Next in math, you should be working on SMJ page 141. And a reminder that on Schoology, I have given more detailed directions of how to be solving those. So I'm going to turn my computer screen around right here. I'm pretty sure there's a glare, but this could maybe give you a little reminder of kind of how that works. If you look on the Schoology website, you'll see that there's details for each one of the problems. The really easy ones, I just maybe give a couple words, but some of the more difficult ones, I give some more directions. I know that one of them asks you to rank numbers from least to greatest, and there's some fractions and some decimals on there. And so my suggestion would be first, use common sense. For example, one of them is the only one worth less than 1. That should be the first one on the list. The other 4 are all really close to each other. They are worth a little bit higher than 5 each. And so my suggestion would be change the decimals to fractions. One of them is 5.03. That's official name of 5 3/100ths, and that may help you compare the other 3 mixed numbers to each other. So keep working on that math SMJ page and continuing your work there. In science, we've mostly just been on a little learning adventure with some of the mini mysteries with Mystery Science. So there have not been assignments attached to that yet. Just watching those and thinking scientifically about how to solve problems. In social studies, you are probably enjoying those Liberties Kids videos. Make sure that you're still watching those. I believe that starting either today or Monday, on the calendar, I've skipped episodes. And in fact, I think it's between Monday and Tuesday, I've skipped like 8 episodes. Now that we have a lot more time than we thought we were going to, I want to give you permission and encouragement to watch every video. It's only going to increase your understanding. It's going to help you with your note taking for spy files and highlighting those papers for social studies. A reminder that your spy files, you are pretending to be a British spy, spying on any American that's a part of the rebellion against the King of England. And so you want to be taking notes on those people as you're watching Liberties Kids videos. Last, you should get your copy of Hatchet out, because in just a moment we're going to read from chapter 16. I want to give a little heads up for next week in writing. You're going to be asked to write a literary essay. Now, we've done a bunch of these, but it's been a long time. And so a literary essay asks you to think about what is a life lesson that the author is trying to teach us through the story. In other words, think about Brian in the book Hatchet. What has he learned about himself? What has he learned about life? What is the theme or the big idea that this book is really about? I mean, yeah, it's a book about a boy surviving in the wilderness, but I think there's something bigger there. And so in order to write your literary essay next week, you're going to need to be thinking about a theme for the book Hatchet. As we get to the last 3 or 4 chapters here, make sure that you are focusing on that theme as well. So today we're going to read from chapter 16. So grab your book. I loved reading a little bit of this last week, and I got some feedback from parents and students that it was nice for students to be able to listen to me read it as they read along in their books. Students, remember that when we read together in class, I do that thing where I will leave off the next word, and I'm hoping you say it. Even though you're only watching this virtually on a video, I'd like you to do that. Stay with me so that you know what's going on in the text. As we left off in chapter 15, Brian had just caught his first fool bird with his spear, and the fool bird was a nickname for that bird that kind of sat there foolishly, and it was his first meat. In fact, that phrase, first something, has been something that Gary Paulson has used a bunch in his book. He's used a lot of different literary devices or author's craft. He's used repetition. He has used shortened sentences that create a weird sense of time. He has used the term first to describe the first time that Brian has done something of importance. So as chapter 16 gets ready to begin, this is in follow-up to him eating his first pieces of meat. It's really the only thing he's eaten besides fish and a few berries, and so this was a big deal for him. Let's start on page 147. It's chapter 16. And now he stood at the end of the long part of the lake, and he was not the same. He would not be the same again. There had been many first days. First arrow day, when he used thread from his tattered old piece of windbreaker and some pitch from a stump to put slivers of feather on a dry willow shaft and make an arrow that would fly correctly. Not accurately. He never got really good with it. But fly correctly so that if a rabbit or a fool bird sat in one place long enough, close enough, and he had enough arrows, he could hit it. That brought first rabbit day, when he killed one of the large rabbits with an arrow and skinned it as he had the first bird, cooked it in the same to find the meat as good. Not as rich as the bird, but still good. And there were strips of fat on the back of the rabbit that cooked into the meat to make it richer. Now he went back and forth between rabbits and fool birds when he could, filling in with fish in the middle. Always hungry. I'm always hungry, but I can do it now. I can get food, and I know I can get food, and it makes me more. I know what I can do. He moved closer to the lake to a stand of nut bushes. These were thick bushes with little stickler pods that held green nuts. Nuts that he thought he might be able to eat, but they weren't ripe yet. He was out for a fool bird, and they liked to hide in the base of the thick part of the nut brush, back in where the stems were close together and provided cover. In the second clump, he saw a bird, moved close to it, paused when the feathers came up, and it made a sound like a cricket, a sign of alarm just before it flew. And then he moved closer when the feathers went down and the bird relaxed. He did this 4 times, never looking at the bird directly, moving toward it at an angle so that it seemed he was moving off to the side. He had perfected this method after many attempts, and it worked so well that he actually caught one with his bare hands until he was standing less than 3 feet from the bird, which was frozen in a hiding attitude in the brush. The bird held for him, and he put an arrow to the bow, one of the feathered arrows, not a fish arrow, and drew and released. It was a clean miss, and he took another arrow out of the cloth pouch at his belt, which he had made from a piece of his windbreaker sleeve, tied it at one end to make a bottom. The fool bird sat still for him, and he did not look directly at it until he drew the second arrow, and aimed and released and missed again. This time the bird jerked a bit, and the arrow stuck next to it so close it almost brushed its breast. Brian only had 2 more arrows, and he debated moving slowly to change the spear over to his right hand and just use that to kill the bird. One more shot, he decided. He would try it again. He slowly brought another arrow out, put it on the string, and aimed and released, and this time saw the flurry of feathers that meant that he had made a... The bird had been struck off-center and was flopping around wildly. Brian jumped on it and grabbed it and slammed it against the ground once, sharply, to kill it. Then he stood and retrieved his arrows and made sure they were all right and went down to the lake to wash the blood off his hands. He kneeled at the water's edge and put the dead bird and his weapons down and dipped his hands into the water. It was very nearly the last act of his life. Later he would not know why he started to turn, some smell or sound, a tiny brushing sound. But something caught his ear, or nose, and he began to turn and had his head half around when he saw a brown wall of fur detach itself from the forest to his rear and come down on him like a runaway truck. He just had time to see that it was a moose. He knew them from pictures, but he did not know, could not guess how large they were when it hit him. It was a cow, and she had no horns, but she took him in the left side of the back with her forehead, took him and threw him out into the water, and then came after him, to finish the job. He had another half second to fill his lungs with air, and she was on him again, using her head to drive him down into the mud of the bottom. Insane, he thought. Just that, the word, insane. Mud filled his eyes, his ears. The horn boss on the moose drove him deeper and deeper into the bottom muck. And suddenly it was over, and he felt alone. He sputtered to the surface, sucking air and fighting panic, and when he wiped the mud and water out of his eyes and cleared them, he saw the cow standing sideways to him, not 10 feet away, calmly chewing on a lily pad root. She didn't appear to even see him, or didn't seem to care about him, and Brian turned carefully and began to swim and crawl out of the water. As soon as he moved, the hair on her back went up, and she charged him again, using her head and front hooves this time, slamming him back down into the water, on his back this time, and he screamed the air out of his lungs and hammered on her head with his fists and filled his throat with water, and she left again. Once more he came to the surface, but he was hurt now, hurt inside, hurt in his ribs, and he stayed hunched over, pretending to be dead. She was standing again, eating. Brian studied her out of one eye, looking to the bank with the other, wondering how seriously he was injured, wondered if she would let him go this time. Insane. He started to move, ever so slowly. Her head turned and her back hair went up, like the hair on an angry dog. And he stopped, took a slow breath. The hair went down and she ate. Move, hair up, stop, hair down. Move, hair up, a half foot at a time, until he was at the edge of the water. He stayed on his hands and knees. Indeed, he was hurt, so he wasn't sure he could even walk away, and she seemed to accept that and let him crawl slowly out of the water and up into the trees and brush. When he was behind a tree, he stood carefully and took stock. Legs seemed all right, but his ribs were hurt bad. He could only take short breaths, and then he had a stabbing pain. And his right shoulder seemed to be wrenched somehow. Also, his bow and spear and foolbird were in the water. At least he could walk, and he had just about decided to leave everything when the cow moved out of the deeper water and left him, as quickly as she had come. Walked down along the shoreline in the shallow water with her long legs making sucking sounds when she pulled them free of the mud. Hanging on a pine lib, he watched her go, half expecting her to turn and come back to run over him again. But she kept going, and when she was well gone from sight, he went to the bank and found the bird, and then waded out in the water to get his bow and spear. Neither of them were broken, and the arrows, incredibly, were still on his belt in the pouch, although messed up with mud and water. It took him most of an hour to work his way back around the lake. His legs worked well enough, but if he took 2 or 3 fast steps, he would begin to breathe deeply, and the pain from his ribs would stop him, and he'd have to lean against a tree until he could slow back down to shallow breathing. She had done more damage than he had originally thought. That insane cow, no sense at all to it. Just madness. When he got to the shelter, he crawled inside, and he was grateful that the coals were still glowing, and that he had thought to get wood first thing in the mornings to be ready for the day. Grateful that he thought he had enough wood for 2 days or 3 days at a time. Grateful that he had fish nearby if he needed to eat. Grateful, finally, as he had dozed off, that he was. So insane, he thought, letting sleep cover the pain in his chest. Such an insane attack for no reason. And he fell asleep with his mind trying to make the moose have a reason. The noise awakened him. It was a low sound, a low roaring sound that came from wind. His eyes snapped open not because it was loud, but because it was new. He had felt wind in his shelter, felt the rain that came with wind, and he had heard thunder many times in the past 47 days, but not this noise. Low, almost alive, almost from a throat somehow. The sound, the noise was a roar, a far-off roar, but coming at him. And when he was fully awake, he sat up in the darkness, grimacing with pain from his ribs. The pain was different now, a tightened pain, and it seemed less. But the sound, so strange, he thought, a mystery sound, a spirit sound, a bad sound. He took some small wood and got the fire going again, felt some little comfort and cheer from the flames, but he also felt that he should get ready. He didn't know how, but he should get ready. The sound was coming for him. It was just coming for him. And he had to get ready. The sound wanted him. He found the spear and bow where they were hanging on the pegs of the shelter wall and brought his weapons to the bed he had made out of pine boughs. more comfort, but like the comfort of the flames, it didn't work with this new threat that he didn't understand yet. Restless threat, he thought, and he stood out of the shelter, away from the flames, to study the sky, but it was too dark. That sound meant something to him, something from his memory, something he'd read about, something he'd seen on television, something... Oh, he thought. Oh no. It was wind. Wind like the sound of a train, with the low belly roar of a train. It was a tornado. That was it. The roar of a train meant bad wind, and it was coming for him. God, he thought, on top of the moose. Not this. Not this. But it was too late. Too late to do anything. In the strange stillness, he looked to the night sky, then turned back into his shelter and was leaning over to go through the door opening when it hit. Later he would think of it and find that it was the same as the moose. Just insanity. He was taken in the back by some mad force and driven into the shelter on his face, slammed down into the pine branches of his bed. At the same time, the wind tore at the fire and sprayed red coals and sparks in a cloud around him. And then it backed out. It seemed to hesitate momentarily and returned with a massive roar, a roar that took his ears and mind and body. He was whipped against the front wall of the shelter like a rag. He felt that ripping pain in his ribs again, and then he was hammered back down into the sand once more while the wind took the whole wall, his bed, the fire, his tools, all of it, and threw it out into the lake, gone out of sight, gone forever. He felt the burning on his neck and reached up to find red coals there. He brushed those off and found more in his pants, brushed those away, and the wind hit again, heavy gusts, tearing gusts. He heard trees snapping in the forest around the rock. He felt his body slipping out and clawed at the rocks to hold himself down. He couldn't think. He just held and knew that he was praying, but he didn't know what the prayer was. He just knew that he wanted to be, to stay and be. And then the wind moved to the lake. Brian heard the great roaring, sucking sounds of water and opened his eyes to see the lake torn by the wind. The water slamming in great waves that went in all ways, fought each other, and then rose in a spout of water going up into the sky like a wet column of light. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The tornado tore one more time at the shore on the opposite side of the lake. Brian could hear trees being ripped down, and then it was done. Gone as rapidly as it had come. It left nothing but Brian in the pitch dark. He could find nothing of where his fire had been, not even a spark. Nothing of his shelters, tools, or bed. Even the body of the fool bird was gone. I'm back to nothing, he thought, trying to find things in the dark. Back to where I was when I crashed. Hurt. In the dark. Just the same. As if to emphasize his thoughts, the mosquitoes, with the fire gone and protective smoke no longer saving him, came back in thick, nostril-clogging swarms. All that was left was the hatchet at his belt. Still there. But now it began to rain, and in the downpour, he would never find anything dry enough to get a fire going. And at last, he pulled his battered body back into water under the overhang, where his bed had been, and wrapped his arms around his ribs. Sleep didn't come. Couldn't come with the insects ripping at him, so he just lay there the rest of the night, slapping mosquitoes and chewing with his mind on the day. This morning he had been fat, well, almost fat, and happy, sure of everything, with good weapons and food and the sun in his face and things looking good for the future. And inside of one day, just one day, he'd been run over by a moose and a tornado. He lost everything and was back to square one, just like that. A flip of some giant coin, and he was a loser. But there's a difference now, he thought. There really is a difference. As we read from the next page or two of the book, I want you to pay attention to how Brian is different than when he first crashed. I might be hit, but I'm not done. When the light comes, I'll start to rebuild. Still have the hatchet, and that's all I had in the first place. Come on, he thought, baring his teeth in the darkness. Come on. Is that the best you can do? Is that all you can hit me with? A moose in a tornado? Well, he thought, holding his ribs and smiling, then spitting mosquitoes out of his mouth. Well, that won't get the job done. That was the difference now. He had changed, and he was tough. I'm tough where it counts. Tough in the head. In the end, right before dawn, a kind of cold snap came down. Something else knew this cold snap, and the mosquitoes settled back into the damp grass and under the leaves, and he could sleep, or doze. And the last thing he had thought that morning as he had closed his eyes was, I hope the tornado hit the moose. When he awakened, the sun was cooking the inside of his mouth, and he had dried his tongue to leather. He had fallen into a deeper sleep with his mouth open just at dawn, and it tasted as if he'd been sucking on his foot all night. He rolled out and almost bellowed with pain from his ribs. They had tightened in the night and seemed to pull at his chest when he moved. He slowed his movements and stood slowly, without stretching unduly, and went to the lake for a drink. At the shore he kneeled carefully and with great gentleness and drank and rinsed his mouth. To his right he saw that the fish pond was still there, although the willow gate was gone and there were no fish. They'll come back, he thought. Soon as I can make a spear or a bow and I'll get one or two for bait, they'll come back. He turned to look at his shelter, saw that some of the wood for the wall was scattered around the beach, but was still there. And then he saw his bow jammed into a driftwood log, broken but with the precious string still intact. Not so bad now, not so bad. He looked down the shoreline for other parts of his wall, and that's when he saw it. Out in the lake, it was the short part of the L. Something curved and yellow was sticking 6 or 8 inches out of the water. It was a bright color, not an earth or natural color, and for a second he couldn't place it. And then he knew it for what it was. It's the tail of the plane, he said it aloud, half expecting to hear somebody answer him. There it was, sticking up out of the water. The tornado must have flipped the plane around somehow when it hit the lake, changed the position of the plane and raised the tail. Well, he thought, just look at that. And at the same moment, a cutting thought hit him. He thought of the pilot, still in the plane, and that brought a shiver and a massive sadness that seemed to settle on him like a weight. And he thought that he should say something or do something for the pilot, some words, but he didn't know any of the right words, the religious words. So he went down to the side of the water and looked at the plane and focused his mind the way he did when he was hunting the fool birds and wanted to concentrate. Focused it on the pilot and thought, have rest forever. That was chapter 16 of Hatchet. You're going to be working on your race question and follow-up to that, along with the rest of your work for today. Remember, log on to Schoology. That'll give you more details as to what to do for your work today. And if you need to, give somebody else a call. FaceTime somebody so you can turn your camera on your SMJ. Send messages to me. Students, I really want you guys to start taking charge of this. I've been having a lot of parents text me and email me, and that's great. And some of their questions you've asked them. But before you ask your parents for help, consider, how can I use technology to help me? You know, this 5th grade age is such an interesting age, as I've been talking to a lot of other teachers and parents who have kids at home that are doing school at home. And I have friends who have little kids, kindergartners, 1st graders, and the parents are basically in charge of everything. And then I have a teenager and some college kids who they're in charge of everything. It's kind of interesting because you're kind of right down the middle of that, where you're starting to be in charge of yourself, but your parents are also still a little bit in charge of you too. So students, how can you take it to the next level? How can you build a schedule for the day of when you're going to do your work? How can you make sure that you get your work done on time? How can you be accountable by showing your parents when your work is done instead of waiting for them to ask you? I would ask you to think today about how can you make that work. Next week, as you start the plan, having students log on to Schoology is something that I really want 100% participation in, so that students can go there to find their work and know what to do instead of waiting for someone else to tell them. Be in charge of you. Students, have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.